My parents offered $150,000 for my wedding, and I foolishly thought they finally loved me. Then, the gift arrived, a legal contract demanding total control over every detail, down to my dress color. Heartbroken, I realized the money was a leash, so I used their own rules to execute a humiliation they'd never forget. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The migraine had been sitting behind my left eye for 3 days, a dull, throbbing reminders of the stress that had become my constant companion. I was curled up on the worn beige sofa in our small apartment, a cold compress pressed against my forehead, while the hum of the city outside leaked through the thin window panes. I felt fragile, physically depleted, and emotionally raw. It wasn't just the flu that had been going around, it was the sheer, crushing weight of expectation. My fiancé, Nathan, was in the kitchen, trying to be quiet as he made tea, the clink of the spoon against the ceramic mug sounding like a gong in my sensitive state. We had been engaged for 4 months, and for 3 of those months, we had been staring at spreadsheets that refused to balance. We wanted a wedding. Not a spectacle, just a wedding. But in this city, even just a wedding cost more than a down payment on a house. Then came the phone call. 3 days ago. My mother, Molly, had called. Her voice had been uncharacteristically warm, devoid of the usual sharp edges and backhanded compliments that typically defined our conversations. She had offered money, not a small amount, $150,000. "We want to do this for you, Fiona," she had said. "We want you to have the day you deserve. We're finally in a place to help, and we want to show you how proud we are." I had cried. I literally wept into the phone. For 28 years, I had been the black sheep, the artist in a family of corporate sharks, the one who wore thrift store clothes while they wore tailored suits. I had spent my entire life waiting for them to look at me and see something other than a disappointment. And finally, it seemed they had. The doorbell rang, shattering the quiet. "I'll get it," Nathan called out softly. I heard the heavy thud of the front door, a murmur of voices, the scratch of a pen on a digital pad, and then the door closing. Nathan walked into the living room holding a thick, cream-colored envelope. It was heavy, made of that expensive, linen-textured paper that smelled like old money. It was embossed with my parents' initials. "It's from them," Nathan said, handing it to me with a cautious smile. "The check, I assume." I sat up, ignoring the pounding in my head. My hands were trembling, not from the fever, but from relief. This was it, the olive branch, the bridge over the canyon that had separated me from my parents for decades. I ran my thumb under the wax seal. Yes, they actually used a wax seal and pulled out the contents. There was no check. Instead, I pulled out a stack of stapled papers, 12 pages, double-sided. The font was Times New Roman, size 11, just small enough to be annoying, just formal enough to be terrifying. At the very top, in bold, capitalized letters, it read, "Sponsorship Agreement and Event Stipulations." I blinked, thinking I was misreading it due to the migraine. I looked closer. "Whereas Oscar and Molly, last name redacted. Hereinafter referred to as the sponsors. Agree to provide funding up to the sum of $150,000 for the wedding of Fiona, hereinafter referred to as the beneficiary." My stomach dropped. It felt as though the floor had dissolved beneath me. This wasn't a gift. It wasn't a check in a card with a heartfelt note about love and new beginnings. It was a legal document. "Fiona," Nathan asked, his voice laced with concern, "what is it?" I couldn't speak. I flipped the page, then the next. My eyes scanned the paragraphs, catching phrases that made my blood run cold. Approve venue selection. Veto power over guest list. Dietary restrictions for the bride to ensure aesthetic compliance. I felt the nausea rise, violent and sudden. The hope that had bloomed in my chest 3 days ago withered instantly, replaced by a familiar, cold ache. They didn't want to help me. They wanted to buy me. I looked up at Nathan, my vision blurring with tears that had nothing to do with joy. They didn't send money, Nathan, I whispered, my voice cracking. They sent a contract. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself. It was a precision strike on the one thing I had been foolish enough to expose, my desire for their love. Nathan took the document from my shaking hands. He sat down next to me, his jaw tightening as he began to read. I watched his eyes scan the pages, seeing the transition from confusion to disbelief. And finally, to anger. This is insane, Fiona, he said, his voice low. Look at Clause 4. The sponsors reserve the exclusive right to select the floral arrangements, table linens, and centerpieces without consultation of the beneficiary. Without consultation, it's your wedding. Keep reading, I said, hugging my knees to my chest, trying to stop the shivering. Look at Clause 8. Nathan flipped the page. He read it out loud. The groom's attire must be approved by the sponsors no later than 60 days prior to the event. The sponsors reserve the right to mandate a specific tailor. He looked up at me, incredulous. They want to dress me like a doll. Clause 12, I said. That's the one that broke me. He turned to the end of the document. Clause 12. All public speeches, including but not limited to the maid of honor toast, the best man speech, and the vows of the beneficiary and the groom, must be submitted in writing for review and editing by the family matriarch, Molly, no less than 30 days prior to the event. The sponsors reserve the right to redact, alter, or omit any portion of said speeches deemed inappropriate or unflattering to the family image. They want to write our vows, Nathan said, dropping the papers onto the coffee table as if they were contaminated. They want to script our wedding. I leaned back against the cushions, closing my eyes. The migraine was blinding now. I thought about the phone call again. I thought about how Molly had sounded so sweet. It was all a performance. A lure to get me to lower my guard so they could snap the collar around my neck. My phone buzzed on the table. A text message. Mother, courier said it was delivered. Please sign and return by Friday so we can release the initial deposit to the venue. We've already put a hold on the Grand Kensington. It's perfect. I stared at the screen. The Grand Kensington. It was a cavernous, gilded ballroom downtown that I hated. It was gaudy, expensive, and echoed like a mausoleum. I had told them years ago, in passing, that I wanted an outdoor wedding, something with trees and natural light. I was a landscape architect, for God's sake. Nature was my life. The Grand Kensington was a windowless box of gold leaf and crystal. They already picked the venue, I said, my voice hollow. She didn't even ask me, she just decided. Nathan reached out and took my hand, squeezing it hard. We don't sign it, we tear it up. We do the small wedding we planned. Pizza and beer in the park if we have to. I know, I said, and I did know that. There was no way I was signing that document, but the hurt was a physical thing, a heavy stone in my gut. Later that evening, I tried to eat the soup Nathan made, but I couldn't swallow. I kept looking at the contract sitting on the table. I picked it up again, reading the fine print of Clause 14 regarding weight management incentives. If I lost 10 pounds, they would increase the budget for the honeymoon. I felt a strange shift inside me. The sadness was evaporating, burning off under the heat of a cold, hard realization. They didn't see me as a daughter. They saw me as an asset, a prop in their social play. I remembered something my father, Oscar, had said to me years ago when I beat him at chess. I was only 10. He had been furious, not because he lost, but because he hadn't seen it coming. You're quiet, Fiona. People mistake quiet for stupid. But you watch. You always watch. I looked at the signature line at the bottom of the last page. X. They expected me to sign. They expected me to be so desperate for the money, so desperate for their approval, that I would sign away my dignity for a party. They thought they held all the cards because they held the checkbook. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. I read blueprints for a living. I know how to spot structural weaknesses. And looking at this contract, at the sheer arrogance of it, I realized they had built their entire plan on a foundation of arrogance. Nathan, I said quietly, a plan beginning to form in the dark corners of my mind. "Don't tear it up yet." "Why?" he asked, looking at me warily. "Because," I said, staring at the wax seal on the envelope. "If they want to play a legal game, they should have remembered who taught me how to read the fine print." To understand why this contract was such a slap in the face, you have to understand my position in the family hierarchy. I was the mistake. My brother, who is 5 years older, is a hedge fund manager. He followed the blueprint perfectly. Private school, Ivy League, finance job, country club membership. I, on the other hand, went to a state university. I studied landscape architecture because I loved the idea of creating living spaces, of working with the earth. To Molly and Oscar, this was akin to saying I wanted to be a professional gardener. "It's dirty work, Fiona," Molly would say, wrinkling her nose whenever I came to dinner in my work boots. "Look at your hands. A lady's hands shouldn't look like she's been digging for potatoes." Molly was a woman constructed entirely of surfaces. She was in her late 50s, but looked a frighteningly smooth 45 thanks to a team of surgeons. She was a philanthropist, which mostly meant she organized galas where rich people gave awards to other rich people for being rich. Her life was a curated feed of perfection. Appearance was her currency, and shame was her weapon. Oscar, my father, was the wallet. He was a corporate executive who had spent 40 years failing upwards. He wasn't malicious in the way Molly was, he was just indifferent. He preferred a quiet life, which meant giving Molly whatever she wanted so she wouldn't turn her laser focus on him. If Molly wanted to micromanage my life, Oscar would fund it just to keep her occupied. The day after the contract arrived, I was feeling physically better, but the emotional wound had hardened into a scab. Nathan and I went to Sunday dinner at my parents' estate, a mandatory monthly ritual where I was usually ignored or critiqued. The house was a sprawling, modern mansion that looked more like a museum than a home. Everything was white. White carpets, white furniture, white walls. I was terrified to touch anything. We sat in the dining room, the silence broken only by the scraping of silver forks on porcelain. "So," Molly said, not looking up from her salad, "did you receive the package?" "We did," I said, keeping my voice neutral. Nathan was gripping his napkin under the table, his knuckles white. "And," Molly looked up, her eyes ice blue and expectant. "The Grand Kensington has a waiting list, you know. I had to pull quite a few strings to get them to hold the date. The manager, lovely man, told me they usually don't book anyone without a 6-figure deposit, but he knows who we are." "It's a lot of detail," Nathan said, trying to be diplomatic. Oscar grunted. "It's a standard sponsorship agreement, Nathan. In business, you don't hand over capital without securing your investment. We're investing in Fiona's future. We just want to ensure the quality of the rollout." The rollout? He was talking about my wedding like it was a product launch. Molly took a sip of her wine. "Fiona, darling, I saw some photos of the dresses you were looking at on that Pinterest thing. Very bohemian, but for the Kensington, you need structure. I've already made an appointment for you at Vera Wang next week. I'll be flying in my stylist from Milan to consult." "Consult?" I asked, "or decide?" Molly smiled, a tight, thin expression that didn't reach her eyes. "Don't be difficult, Fiona. You have terrible taste. You always have. Remember prom? That awful vintage thing? You looked like a refugee from a costume party. I'm just trying to save you from yourself. When you walk down that aisle, you represent us. And I won't have you looking like a gardener." She gestured around the room with her fork. "This wedding is going to be the social event of the season. The senator is coming, the board of directors, people who matter. We can't have you reading some sentimental, rambling vows about soulmates and struggle. It needs to be poised, elegant." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, though her eyes were hard as diamonds. "Think of this money as a salary, Fiona. You do the job, you get paid, you get the fairy tale. All you have to do is follow the script." I looked at Nathan. I looked at my father, who was busy cutting his steak, refusing to meet my eyes. And then I looked at Molly. She didn't see a daughter. She saw a doll she could dress up to impress her friends. She thought she had already won. She thought the money was so blinding that I wouldn't notice the cage she was building around me. But as I sat there, listening to her list off the dietary restrictions she was planning for the reception, no carbohydrates, obviously, we don't want bloated guests in the photos, I realized something. She hadn't just booked the venue, she had already told people. She had already bragged. She had staked her reputation on this event. She needed this wedding more than I did. And that was when the seed of the plan fully took root. "I'll look over the contract one more time," I said, forcing a smile. "It's very generous of you." Molly beamed, mistaking my submission for victory. "Good girl, I knew you'd come around." She had no idea what was coming around. The drive home from that dinner was silent, but the air in the car was thick, charged with a frantic, electric energy. Nathan drove with a white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel, his jaw set so hard I could see the muscle twitching in his cheek. I stared out the window at the passing streetlights, their orange glow blurring into streaks. My mind wasn't on the road. It was racing through the architectural blueprints of my mother's scheme. "W. "You can't do it, Fiona," Nathan finally said, breaking the silence as we pulled onto our street. "I don't care about the money. I don't care about the venue. I can't let them treat you like an employee in your own life." "I know," I said softly, unbuckling my seatbelt. "We aren't going to do it, but we aren't just going to walk away either. If we walk away now, they spin the narrative. They tell everyone I'm the ungrateful daughter who rejected their generosity. They play the victim. I need to know exactly how deep they're in before I make my move." The next morning, I took a sick day. I needed the hours. I sat at our kitchen table, the contract spread out before me like a map of a battlefield. I started with Clause 3, venue coordination and pre-approval. My mother had mentioned the Grand Kensington manager, knew who we were. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for the Kensington's events department. "Grand Kensington Events, this is Julian speaking." "Hi, Julian," I said, pitching my voice to be bright and breezy, masking the tremor in my chest. "This is Fiona. My mother, Molly, has been coordinating the wedding for the 14th of June." "Oh, Fiona, the bride." Julian's voice dripped with professional enthusiasm. "So wonderful to finally hear from you. Your mother is a force of nature, isn't she? We've been moving mountains to get everything ready for the save the dates." My heart skipped a beat. The save the dates. "Yes, didn't she tell you?" Julian laughed lightly. "She insisted we rush the printing through our in-house stationer. She wanted them in the mail by yesterday morning to ensure the senator received his before the session starts. We sent out the first batch of 200 to the VIP list yesterday afternoon." I felt a cold chill wash over me, followed immediately by a surge of adrenaline. Yesterday, she hadn't even waited for me to sign the contract. She hadn't waited for me to say yes. She had already invited the senator. "That's wonderful, Julian," I managed to say. "She's very efficient. I assume the deposit was substantial." "Oh, absolutely," Julian confirmed. 50,000 non-refundable, of course, to secure the ballroom and the catering minimums. But for an event of this magnitude, it's standard. I hung up the phone and stared at the wall. $50,000 non-refundable, and invitations already in the mail to the city's elite. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a trap, but she had made a critical error. She had sprung the trap before checking if the prey was actually inside. She had assumed my compliance was a guarantee. By sending those invites, she had handcuffed herself to the date. If the wedding didn't happen, or if the bride didn't show up, she wouldn't just lose money. She would lose face. To Molly, losing 50 grand was annoying. Being humiliated in front of a senator was a fate worse than death. I needed more proof. I needed to know just how much control she planned to exert. I logged into my parents' shared, family cloud account, a shared digital folder we used years ago for vacation photos. I guess she hadn't changed the password. She was terrible with technology. I was right, password, Molly Best Mom 1. I navigated to a folder created 2 weeks ago titled Fiona's Project. Not Fiona's wedding, Fiona's project. I opened it. Inside were subfolders, approved guest list, aesthetic board, and a document titled Speech Drafts. I clicked on approved guest list. I scrolled through the names. It was a who of people I didn't know. Business partners, board members, politicians. I searched for Nathan's parents. They weren't there. I searched for Sarah, my best friend since kindergarten. She wasn't there. In the notes column next to the guest count, Molly had written, "Cut the groom's extended family to accommodate the board of trustees. They won't notice. They're from Ohio." I slammed the laptop shut, my hands shaking with rage. They weren't just taking over the wedding, they were erasing us from it. 3 days later, I was standing on a pedestal in a fitting room that smelled of lavender and judgment. The bridal salon was exactly the kind of place I hated. Hushed tones, champagne that tasted like vinegar, and sales assistants who looked at my size 8 hips with thinly veiled disdain. Molly sat on a velvet chaise lounge, sipping a mimosa. She held a paddle with numbers on it like she was judging a dog show. "Too much tulle," she announced as I walked out in a dress I actually kind of liked. "It makes you look wide." The assistant, a woman named Pierre who looked terrified of my mother, rushed to adjust the hem. "We can take the volume out, Mrs. Redacted." "No," Molly snapped. "Next, bring out the mermaid cut I selected." "Mother," I said, catching my own eye in the mirror, I looked tired. "I don't like mermaid cuts. I want something flowy, something I can move in." Molly set her glass down with a sharp clink. "Fiona, we discussed this. The theme is opulence. Flowy looks messy, messy looks cheap. And since I am paying for the photographer, who, by the way, shoots for Vogue, I need you to look structured." She stood up and walked over to me, her heels clicking on the marble floor. She leaned in close, adjusting a strap on my shoulder with a yank that was a little too rough. "Have you signed the contract yet?" she whispered, her voice low so Pierre wouldn't hear. "The caterer needs the dietary restrictions by Friday." "I'm reviewing it," I lied, keeping my face impassive. Nathan had some questions about Clause 12, the speeches. Molly rolled her eyes. "What is there to question? We can't have his college friends getting drunk and telling stories about beer pong in front of the senator. It's for your own protection." "Is the senator definitely coming?" I asked, watching her reflection in the mirror. "I wouldn't want to structure the whole day around him if he's busy." Molly's chest puffed up. "Of course he's coming. He RSVP'd yesterday. I told him you were dying to meet him." "And Nathan's parents?" I asked. "Did they RSVP?" The air in the room stood still. Molly didn't blink. She didn't even flinch. She just smoothed the fabric on my hip. "We're still finalizing the numbers, Fiona. You know how tight the capacity is at the Kensington. We have to prioritize. Business connections are what will secure your future. Nathan's parents are lovely people, I'm sure, but they don't bring anything to the table. Literally." She turned back to the sales assistant. "Bring the mermaid, now." I stood there, frozen. It was the confirmation I needed. She wasn't just cutting them, she was dehumanizing them. They don't bring anything to the table. I felt a fire ignite in my belly, burning away the last remnants of the daughter who wanted to please her mommy. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not a mother, but a manager of a failing asset. "Okay," I said, forcing a smile that felt like baring my teeth. "Bring the mermaid." Molly smiled, satisfied. "See, was that so hard? Submission is so much more becoming on you." She thought she had broken me. She didn't realize that I was just stalling for time while I loaded the cannon. As I changed into the stiff, constricting dress she wanted, I pulled out my phone. I sent a text to Nathan. "Me, she cut your parents. She invited the senator. The deposit is non-refundable. Nathan, do it. Burn it down." I walked out in the mermaid dress. It was tight. It was uncomfortable. I looked like a statue wrapped in toilet paper. "Perfection," Molly sighed, clapping her hands. "We'll take it. Rush order. Put it on my card." I stood on the pedestal, looking down at her. "It is perfect," I said. "Thank you, Mother. You really know what's best." The lie tasted like ash, but it bought me the week I needed. The week leading up to the deadline for the contract was a blur of covert operations. By day, I was the dutiful daughter, answering Molly's barrage of emails about centerpieces, white orchids only, and music, string quartet, absolutely no DJ. By night, Nathan and I were planning a revolution. We found a venue. It wasn't the Grand Kensington. It was a small, historic botanical garden about 2 hours outside the city. It had a glass house filled with ferns and a massive oak tree where we could say our vows. It was available on the exact same day as Molly's royal wedding. The fee was $3,000. We paid it from our savings account. But Molly wasn't making it easy to keep the secret. She was escalating. On Wednesday, she sent an email titled Urgent, Vow Revisions. I opened the attachment. She hadn't just edited our vows, she had rewritten them entirely. Fiona's vows, revised by Molly. Nathan, I take you as my husband. I promise to support your career and build a home that reflects the values and status my family has instilled in me. I am eternally grateful for the guidance of my parents, who made this union and this life possible. I pledge to honor them by honoring you. I read it out loud to Nathan in our living room. He looked like he was going to be sick. She put a thank you note to herself in your wedding vows, he said, shaking his head in disbelief. That is pathologically narcissistic. It gets worse, I said. Look at the groom's vows. Nathan's vows, revised by Molly. Fiona, I am humbled to join your family. I promise to strive every day to be worthy of the legacy your parents have built. I'm not saying that, Nathan said, his voice flat. I will bite my tongue off before I say that. You won't have to, I promised him. The pressure mounted on Thursday. My father, Oscar, called me. Fiona, he said, his voice gruff. Your mother is getting anxious. She hasn't received the signed contract. She needs it for the files. She says you're stalling. I'm not stalling, Dad, I said, putting on my best innocent voice. I just wanted to make sure everything was perfect. I'm mailing it today, overnight shipping. She'll have it by Friday morning. Good, Oscar said. She's been difficult. Just sign the damn thing so we can get this show on the road. The senator's office called to confirm security protocols. This is a big deal for me too, Fiona. Don't screw this up. I won't screw it up, Dad, I said. I'm giving you exactly the wedding you paid for. I hung up. I sat down at the table with the contract, the thick, cream-colored paper, the sponsor's agreement. I took a red pen. I didn't sign the signature line. Instead, on the very last page, underneath the empty line for the beneficiary, I wrote a single sentence in my neatest architectural handwriting. Per Clause 1, the sponsors agree to fund the wedding. However, the beneficiary declines the terms of ownership. Then I took the invitation we had designed for our real wedding. It was simple, recycled paper with pressed wildflowers. Fiona and Nathan invite you to join them in the woods. No dress code, no speeches, just love, June 14th. I placed the unsigned contract and our real invitation into a large envelope. I added one more thing. A printout of the email from the Grand Kensington confirming the non-refundable nature of the deposit, and a printout of the guest list showing the exclusion of Nathan's parents. I highlighted the note, "They won't notice. They're from Ohio." I sealed the envelope. It was heavy, it felt like a bomb. "Are you ready?" Nathan asked, standing by the door with his car keys. "I'm terrified," I admitted. "When she opens this, she's going to go nuclear." "She was always going to go nuclear," Nathan said. "At least this way, we aren't in the blast zone." He was right, we wouldn't be there. By the time she opened this tomorrow morning, we would be driving to the botanical garden to meet with the real caterer, a taco truck. We were going dark. I walked to the mailbox on the corner. I hesitated for a fraction of a second, the years of conditioning trying to pull me back, trying to make me be the good girl. But then I remembered the mermaid dress. I remembered weight management incentives. I remembered they don't bring anything to the table. I dropped the envelope into the slot. It made a solid thud. The fuse was lit. The fallout wasn't immediate, which was almost more terrifying than the explosion itself. Friday morning came and went. The tracking number confirmed the package had been delivered at 9:03 a.m. I sat in our living room, staring at my phone, waiting for it to ring. I expected screaming. I expected threats. But the phone stayed silent. Maybe she fainted, Nathan suggested, pacing the kitchen. Maybe she's in shock. Molly doesn't faint, I said, my stomach twisting into a knot. She plots. At 4:00 p.m., a black Lincoln Town car pulled up to our apartment building. My phone finally buzzed. It wasn't a call, it was a text from Oscar. Father, the driver is outside. We are expecting you at the pre-wedding gala at the club. The senator is already here. Do not make a scene. We will discuss your letter on Monday. Wear the blue dress. They were ignoring it. They were simply choosing to pretend I hadn't just resigned from their family. They assumed that the social pressure of the gala and the presence of the senator would force me back into line. They were betting everything on my fear of public embarrassment. I'm not going, I said, showing the text to Nathan. Nathan looked at the car outside, then back at me. If you don't go, they'll spin the story. They'll tell everyone you're sick or unstable. They'll control the narrative forever. If you want to end this, Fiona, you have to end it in front of the audience they care about. He was right. If I hid, I was just the rebellious child. If I stood in the center of their world and spoke the truth, I was a free woman. Get your suit, I said, standing up, and bring the copies. We didn't wear the clothes they wanted. I wore a simple white jumpsuit I'd bought on sale, sharp, modern, and completely unapproved. Nathan wore his favorite gray suit, the one Molly said looked pedestrian. When we walked into the country club, the air was thick with the smell of expensive perfume and old money. A string quartet was playing something dull and classical. The room was filled with people who held the keys to the city, politicians, CEOs, board members. And there, in the center of it all, holding a crystal flute of champagne, was Molly. She saw us enter. Her eyes narrowed for a fraction of a second, scanning my outfit, registering the defiance. But then the mask slipped back into place. She smiled, a wide, predatory smile, and glided over, Oscar trailing behind her like a shadow. Fiona, Nathan, she announced, her voice pitched loud enough to turn heads. So glad you could finally make it. We were just telling the senator about the exquisite floral arrangements for the Kensington. She leaned in to kiss my cheek, her grip on my arm like a vice. You look interesting, she hissed in my ear. We will talk about that ridiculous letter later. Smile, the senator is watching. I'm not here to smile, Mother, I whispered back. You are here to do what you are told, she snapped, her voice low and venomous. I have $150,000 invested in this. You will not embarrass me. She turned us toward a tall, silver-haired man surrounded by admirers. The senator. Senator, Molly beamed, may I present my daughter Fiona and her fiancé, Nathan. She said Nathan's name like it was a temporary condition. The senator smiled, extending a hand. A pleasure. Your mother tells me this wedding is going to be the event of the decade, a real merger of families. It's certainly a production, I said, shaking his hand firmly. Molly laughed, a brittle, tinkling sound. She's so modest. Attention, everyone. She clinked a spoon against her glass. The room fell silent. The music stopped. If I could have a moment, Molly said, stepping onto the small dais, dragging me with her. I just wanted to make a toast to my beautiful daughter. Planning a wedding is hard work, but when you have a vision, a legacy to uphold, it's worth every penny. To Fiona, for allowing us to give her the perfection she deserves. Hear, hear, Oscar mumbled, raising his glass. Molly handed the microphone to me. It was a trap. She expected me to say, thank you. She expected me to bow my head and play the role of the grateful beneficiary. It was Clause 12 in action. All public speeches must be approved. I took the microphone. My hand wasn't shaking. Thank you, Mother, I said, my voice clear, echoing slightly in the large hall. Perfection is certainly the word. In fact, the attention to detail has been so overwhelming, I feel I need to share the credit. Molly's smile faltered slightly. This wasn't the script. My parents offered to sponsor my wedding, I continued, looking out at the sea of faces. And in our family, sponsorship comes with terms. I think it's important for everyone here, especially those who value integrity in business, to understand exactly what goes into an event like this. I reached into my purse and pulled out the contract. The room went deadly quiet. "Fiona," Molly warned, stepping forward, "that's enough." "Clause 12, I read aloud, my voice steady. "All public speeches must be reviewed and approved by the family matriarch." Well, I'm afraid this one wasn't approved, but I think you'll find Clause 14 more interesting. "Stop her," Molly hissed at Oscar. Oscar stood frozen, his face pale. "Clause 14, weight management incentives," I read. "The beneficiary will receive a honeymoon budget increase of $5,000 for every 5 pounds lost prior to the final fitting." A ripple of shock went through the room. Someone gasped. The senator looked down at his drink, uncomfortable. "And let's not forget the guest list addendum," I said, turning to look directly at Molly, who was now trembling with rage. "Where it is noted that the groom's parents were removed from the invite list because, and I quote, they don't bring anything to the table. They're from Ohio." The silence in the room was absolute. It was the kind of silence that destroys worlds. "I returned this contract unsigned yesterday," I said, dropping the papers onto the floor at Molly's feet. "Along with the invitation to my real wedding. A wedding where the only price of admission is love, not submission. None of you are invited, especially you, Mother." I handed the microphone back to a stunned Molly. "The asset is liquidated," I said quietly, only for her to hear. I took Nathan's hand. "Let's go." We walked out. Behind us, I heard Molly start to screech. "It's a joke," she stressed, "it's a bridal prank." But the desperate, shrill panic in her voice told everyone the truth. The illusion was shattered. The fallout was catastrophic, and it was glorious. By the time we got back to the apartment, my phone was blowing up with texts from cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. Apparently, someone had recorded the speech. It hadn't gone viral on the internet yet, but it had gone viral in the specific, insulated world of high society gossip. The next morning, the real consequences began. We learned later from my brother, who called me, laughing for the first time in a decade, that the senator had left the party immediately after we walked out. He told Oscar that he couldn't be associated with people who treat family like livestock. He pulled his endorsement for the charity gala Molly was organizing for the fall. The Grand Kensington was less forgiving. Since Molly had signed the contract with them in her name, she was liable for the full cost of the cancellation. Because she canceled less than 30 days out, she lost the entire $50,000 deposit, plus a cancellation fee. But the money didn't hurt her, the silence did. The social exile was Swy. FT, in that circle, appearances are everything. By exposing the machinery behind the curtain, the cruelty, the contracts, the weight clauses, I had made her look not just controlling but grotesque. She became a pariah. The matriarch who tried to buy her daughter's soul and got a receipt instead. 2 weeks later, on June 14th, Nathan and I stood under the massive oak tree in the botanical garden. It was a warm, breezy day. The air smelled of damp earth and blooming jasmine. There were no white orchids. There was no string quartet. There was a playlist Nathan made on Spotify playing through a portable speaker. There were only 30 people there. My best friend Sarah was my maid of honor. Nathan's parents were in the front row. His mom was crying, clutching a handkerchief, and his dad was beaming, holding a video camera from 2005. I wore a dress I bought online for $300. It was flowy, it was messy, it was perfect. When it came time for the vows, nobody checked a script. "Fiona," Nathan said, his hands holding mine, warm and steady. "I promise to never treat our love like a business. I promise to be your partner, not your manager. I promise that you will never have to earn your place in my heart." I choked back tears, real tears, happy tears. "Nathan, I promise to build a life with you that is ours. No blueprints but the ones we draw together. I choose you, today and every day." We ate tacos from a truck. We drank beer from bottles. We danced barefoot on the grass until the sun went down and the fireflies came out. I looked around at the small group of people laughing and talking. There was no tension, no judgment, no contracts. I realized then that my parents had been right about one thing. They said they wanted to give me the wedding I deserved. And looking at Nathan, laughing with his dad, and my brother loosening his tie and actually smiling, I realized I finally had it. I haven't spoken to Molly since the gala. I hear she's spending a lot of time in the Hamptons house, avoiding the city. Oscar sent a card, unsigned, with a check for $5,000 inside. I donated it to a charity that helps young women escape controlling households. I didn't need their money. I didn't need their approval. I had broken the contract, and for the first time in my life, I was free.